These are the items I'm going to talk about in this training session. First of all, an introduction to zone pressure diagnostics, or ZPD. This is sometimes referred to as series leakage testing. Non-modifiable zone analysis is going to be covered. This has some disadvantages. It can lead you astray, but it does also have usefulness. The much more powerful analysis is modifiable zone analysis. And for examples of this type of analysis, as a calculation aid, I will use the Residential Energy Dynamics ZPD tool. This is free. It's online. You could go there right now if you want. It's always there for you to use if you wish. Of course, tools are required for doing zone pressure diagnostics. The primary tool is a blower door. The one pictured is from the Energy Conservatory. You need 1 or 2 digital manometers. It's not appropriate to use a non-digital manometer. It's not accurate enough. And if you use 2, you will find that it's faster than if you use 1. Also, of course, you can use digital manometers that are hooked up to Wi-Fi. This can be helpful. You need hoses for the manometer, and when you're doing modifiable zone analysis, you need a calculation aid. And as I've already mentioned, we are going to use the free zone pressure diagnostics tool that's online, made by Residential Energy Dynamics. You can see the web address on this slide. Here is a house that shows many pressure boundaries. They are labeled. Notice that there is a blower door operating, depressurizing the house to a level of 50 pascals. And as you know, if we do that, it's possible to find the whole house leakage area. What zone pressure diagnostics does for us is gives us more detailed information about a particular zone. Now, we can have various zones in a single house, for example, an attic, this area up here, and of course this has no gable ends so that you can see inside, but attics, real attics have gable ends. An attic can be a zone, a basement can be a zone, or an attached garage can be a zone. In my experience, I find that the most often tested zones are unconditioned attics and attached garages. Let's for a moment just look at the unconditioned attic in this drawing. This attic is bounded by 2 pressure boundaries. One is, we'll say, the attic floor right here, and the other is the pressure boundary that's made up by the roof structure and each gable end. With zone pressure diagnostics, we can measure the effectiveness of this pressure boundary, that is, how leaky is it. We can actually come upon a metric that gives us the number of square inches in this pressure boundary, and we can do the same for this pressure boundary from the attic to the outdoors. Again, we can determine the leakiness of it and get the metric of square inches of leakage. So we have this pressure boundary from the zone to the outdoors, and this pressure boundary, the attic floor, from the zone to the house. This is a very powerful analysis. I have already mentioned that sometimes this zone pressure diagnostics testing is referred to as series leakage testing. This table shows some of the more common zones that are tested in houses with zone pressure diagnostics. First of all, an attic, which I showed in the last slide. And notice we have a column for interior pressure boundaries, and we have a column for exterior pressure boundaries. Another way to term interior pressure boundary is from the zone to the house. For example, an attic, we have the attic floor is the boundary from the zone to the house. For a crawl space, the crawl ceiling is the boundary from the zone to the house. For a basement, the basement ceiling is the boundary from the zone to the house. And of course, for an attached garage, the wall between the garage and the house is the boundary between the garage and the house. And then we have the exterior boundaries, which make up the boundary for the zone to the outdoors. For example, with an attic, the roof and gable ends and soffits make up the boundary for the zone to the outdoors. And for example, for the garage, the exterior garage wall, the garage ceiling makes up the boundaries for the zone, the garage in this case, to the outdoors. On this slide and the next, I'm going to go over some of the many reasons for using zone pressure diagnostics in houses. First of all, we can determine the leakage in terms of CFM50 flow and area from the building to the zone. For example, if the zone is an attic, we can determine the leakage through the attic floor from the zone to the house, both in terms of flow and in terms of square inches. We can do this before and after we weatherize the attic floor so that we can determine how effective we have been. This is a very good thing for crews that are working on this air sealing process, and it's also a very good thing for quality control inspectors to take a look at when they arrive after the work has been done to see if the work is as it should be. Secondly, we can determine the leakage in terms of CFM50 flow and square inches of area from the zone to the outdoors. Again, if you imagine an attic as the zone, we can determine the leakage from the attic to the outdoors. This can be very helpful in determining the square inches of venting from the attic to the outdoors. Very often, this is something that is important for weatherization programs, and we can determine the square inches of that venting with zone pressure diagnostics. We can also determine the through zone leakage in CFM50 flow from the house to the outdoors. Again, imagine an attic. This is the leakage through both of the pressure boundaries, the attic floor and the gable end roof assembly. This will become more clear as we go through this training session and we do some examples and look at more illustrations. We can also use zone pressure diagnostics to appraise indoor air quality issues such as, are we getting bad air from an attached garage? We might get carbon monoxide from a garage. Are we getting bad air, maybe mold and mildew and other things from a crawl space? We can determine if the boundary between these zones, an attached garage or a crawl space, are tight to inhibit the flow of air from those zones into the living area of the house. 4 more uses of zone pressure diagnostics are on this slide. First of all, as I've already hinted at on the previous slide, we can determine the effectiveness of air sealing pre and post weatherization. For example, the attic I mentioned, or pre and post air sealing to a common wall between an attached garage and a kitchen, or pre and post air sealing of a crawl space ceiling to make sure we keep bad air out. Next, zone pressure diagnostics makes air sealing targets possible. I will mention at the end of this training session that there are a couple of state weatherization programs that use air sealing targets, and because zone pressure diagnostics gives you metrics, gives you numbers, you can meet these targets if you wish, or establish targets if you don't already have them. ZPD also demonstrates the downside of adding attic ventilation. If you add attic ventilation, something that you are doing is making the roof gable end air barrier less resistant to airflow. This can increase the whole house leakage as a result of that. So this will increase energy use. That's a good thing to be aware of. We never want to overdo attic ventilation because it can very well increase energy use into a house. And a reason for using ZPD was mentioned to me about a year ago by someone who was in a training session. It can be very helpful data for a liability case. In this particular case, a contractor was being sued for causing moisture problems in a house, moisture that the homeowner and the homeowner's attorneys thought was coming from the crawl space. The contractor fortunately had pre and post zone pressure diagnostic data for the crawl space ceiling. The legal consultants for the homeowner had no such metrics to offer during the court case, so the contractor won, and I think should have won. The final objective for ZPD that comes to mind is that it demonstrates whether the thermal boundary and the pressure boundary are aligned. For example, in this illustration below, generally we would insulate this attic floor to this unconditioned attic. We would want to find that this is the better of these two pressure boundaries. So if this is the better pressure boundary and we have the thermal insulation installed here, that means that the thermal and the pressure boundaries are aligned. If we install the insulation here, but then this is the better of the two pressure boundaries, that would mean that the thermal boundary and the pressure boundary are not aligned, and that is not a good thing. So ZPD can be used here to confirm that the thermal boundary and the pressure boundary are aligned. What we are doing with zone pressure diagnostics is choosing a zone within the house. In this case, it's the attic in this example. The house is being depressurized, as it shows in this illustration, or pressurized, makes no difference, with the blower door test. But rather than measuring the whole house leakage as our final result, although we do get that as part of the process, we are determining the leakage through each of the pressure boundaries of the zone. Every zone has two pressure boundaries. In the case of this attic, the pressure boundary from the zone to the house is the attic floor. The pressure boundary from the zone to the outdoors is the roof and gable end structures. So we get a metric through this pressure boundary, leakage in square inches, a metric through this pressure boundary, a leakage in square inches, and we also are able to measure the through zone, sometimes called the total path, from the house to the outdoors through the zone, which takes account of both of those pressure boundaries. That allows us then, if we have the whole house CFM 50 value, which we almost always do, we can determine how much of that whole house CFM 50 value is going up through this particular zone in this example. This is a simple and general ZPD guideline or rule, and that is that each pressure boundary imposes a resistance to airflow. The greater the resistance to airflow, the higher the pressure difference across the boundary. Or we can state that inversely, the higher the pressure difference across a pressure boundary, the greater its resistance to airflow. So which of these two pressure boundaries is the tighter of the two? Which imposes the greatest resistance to airflow? Well, while you're thinking about that, Let me tell you how we got these numbers. The house is being depressurized with the blower door. We use our digital manometer, and we stand where this fellow's standing in the house, and we put a hose to our manometer up into the attic and close the attic hatch door. So we're measuring from the house to the attic, and we find that that's 37 pascals. Because the pressure from the zone to the outdoors plus from the zone to the house must equal 50, because we are depressurizing to 50, this pressure from the zone to the outdoors must therefore be 13. So which of these is the better pressure boundary? In other words, which of these imposes the greater resistance to airflow? It is the attic floor right here. It has the higher of the two pressures. This is a preview of the Residential Energy Dynamics Zone Pressure Diagnostics tool. Here is the web address to go to find the tool. When you get there, in the left-hand side of the screen, there will be a navigation menu. Just click on ZPD, and you can go and try the tool for yourself. I recommend that you do that as soon as you can. I think this preview will give you some idea of where we are going with this training session. Let me just show you the overview of the sections of the red tool. We have at the top the identification and whether we're doing pressurization or not. In a moment I'll show you what use advanced inputs is about. The initial zone configuration is for the way we found the house, and we enter the information here. And then we have the modified zone configuration here. This section of the tool is for the way we change the house by either adding a hole, opening a door, or closing a hole, or closing a door. And then finally the results of the analysis are listed down at the bottom. I'm not going to go to a live version of the tool. This is quite a bit larger. You can see the top section right here. You can type in identification. You can decide whether you want to pressurize or depressurize the house. You have to choose the right one. Later on in this training, we'll go over use advanced inputs. Notice if I click on that, we can enter temperatures that will automatically adjust the blower door numbers, zone temperature to fine-tune a little bit more, the building pressure exponent. Again, this is one of the finer details, and we can add baseline pressures here. Now I'm going to uncheck that. Down here to the initial zone configuration section of the tool, zone WRT, that's with reference to the outdoors. This is the baseline pressure. If you use the auto baseline on your pressure gauge, you would enter 0, and this is with the BD, the blower door, on, and it does the mathematics here for you. If you didn't use the auto baseline and we had a pressure here of -2, notice what happens to the delta P. I'll go back to 0 there now. Then here we have, are we looking at house with reference to zone pressure or zone with reference to the outdoors? And then finally, right here, we put in the blower door flow adjusted to 50 pascals. This is the whole house CFM 50. Notice with all the red tools and with this one, you are able to adjust the units. Also with the red tools, if you click on or touch the label, you will find that a help box comes up, pop-up help we call it, and it will give you instructions of what that particular input or result means, and also what the ranges are for that. Now I'm going to scroll down to the next section, the modified zone configuration here. the hole or the door is located between the zone and the house or the zone and the outdoors. You can choose that type of modification. Add a hole or open a door. You will usually use that one, although occasionally you might plug a hole or close a door. And now with that hole open or closed, with the zone modified, you take pressure tests again with the house at 50 pascals or whatever pressure you are able to get to. Doesn't have to be 50. And you enter the values here. Again, with that door or hole open, you then do a blower door test and record the value here. Notice we've gone from 2400 CFM50 to 2950 CFM50. Of course, if we open a door or open a hole, the house becomes leakier. And then finally, for the final section of the tool, we have the results from the house to the zone to the outdoors, and through zone. Here are the leakage values in units of CFM50. Let's look at the house to the zone. In this case, it's an attic. We have 1400 plus or minus 600. This 600 is the uncertainty. This is the leakage area in square inches, 144 plus or minus 64. And here we have the percentage of uncertainty. The zone to the outdoors, in this particular case, you can see for that, the attic to the outdoors, we have 240 square inches of leakage. That corresponds with the amount of attic venting. And in this example, this final one right here, percent, this final result in blue font, all results are in blue font in the red tools. Percent of whole house leakage passing through this zone, which is the attic, 42% of a total of 2,400 is passing through this zone. So that's a quick review of the red tool. We will go over that in more detail later on in this training. Non-modifiable zone pressure diagnostics has severe limitations. However, some programs have used it as their primary means of determining whether an attic floor, for example, is sealed well enough or not. This really is not possible to do, and these programs were in error when they did that. It does, however, allow the analyst to determine if a space is connected by airflow, in other words, pressure, using your digital manometer while the blower door is operating in the house. So you've got to have the blower door running when you do this, either pressurized or depressurized. You should be very cautious with this technique because it can be misleading, and I will get into those issues. And the last bullet here is the house to zone pressure difference plus the zone to the outdoor pressure difference should always equal the house to the outdoor pressure difference. Remember, the house to outdoor pressure difference is the pressure difference being created by your blower door. Here are some examples of non-modifiable zones in houses. First of all, joist cavities in Cape Cod style houses. These are sometimes referred to as story-and-a-half houses. Crawl spaces with no access, soffits above kitchen cabinets, and the one I have used most in the field is an attached porch, roof, ceiling cavity. Now, remember that non-modifiable zones merely mean that you cannot open a temporary hole to do a test. There is no way to open a hole. In an attic, by contrast, you almost always have a walk-up stairway with a door to an attic, or you have an attic hatch or an attic scuttle. That makes an attic a modifiable zone. What I am talking about here are non-modifiable zones. You cannot open, or in some cases close, something up to change the pressures in the zone when you're doing a blower door test. When we're doing a non-modifiable test, the only thing we are able to do, because we can't open or close a hole or a door, the only thing we can do is look at pressures. We can measure the pressure from the house to the zone and from the zone to the outdoors. So here we have in the green zone pressures and house to zone pressure, zone to outdoor pressure, and notice here that all of these add up to 50. If you come down to the bottom, 49 and 1 adds up to 50. All the others add up to 50. Here we have the relative size of the leaks for the given zone pressures here. And notice for 37 and 13, the row that's a little bit darker, the house to zone is only 1/2 the hole size of the zone to the outdoors. So another way of saying that is the zone to the outdoor leakage is twice what the house to the zone leakage is. But notice for those relative sizes, we have 37 and 13 here. Now keep this row in mind. I'm going to use that on the next couple of slides for an example. With this illustration and the one on the next slide, I want to demonstrate to you one of the fairly serious limitations of non-modifiable zone analysis. First of all, we have a house here that's obviously made up for this example. Let's pretend the house, of course, would have gable ends and walls at this end, but I want you to be able to see inside of it. And what I've done is put some holes in this attic floor, and there are 2 holes here, and there are twice as many, or 4 holes in the roof. In other words, we have twice the amount of leakage in the roof as we do in the attic floor. Now, from the previous table that we looked at, the 13 and 37 pressure combination, when the house is at 50 pascals pressurized or depressurized with a blower door, that indicates that the 37 has only half the amount of leakage that the 13 pressure has. So as you can see very clearly here, we have half the leakage in the attic floor that we have in the other pressure boundary, the roof and gable end pressure boundary. Here we have the same house, but the holes are now much, much bigger, as you can see. But the important thing to keep in mind is that we still have 2 holes in the attic floor pressure boundary and 4 holes, or twice the leakage, in the other pressure boundary, the roof and the gable ends. That would give us the pressures, if we are using a blower door to pressurize or depressurize the house, 50 pascals. The pressure from the zone or the attic to the outdoors is 13, and the pressure from the attic to the living space or the house is 37. Now you can see that the pressures are the same as on the previous slide, but, and here's the previous slide, you can see here the holes are much smaller, but the relationship of the hole size is the same here as it is here. Now, with this in mind, you can see how this can be misleading. We know that the pressure boundary that we call, in this case, the attic floor, is tighter than the roof because the pressure that it's able to hold across the pressure boundary is much higher, but we have no idea with the pressure what size the holes are. Are the holes big enough for us to be concerned about? Should we not be concerned about them? If we are not able to create a hole, in other words, if we can only do a non-modifiable zone analysis, we really cannot come to a conclusion regarding the size of the holes and the severity of our air leakage issue. Within the context of the analysis we've just gone through with the differing hole sizes in the roof and in the attic floor, I want to go over this analysis that has to do with what some programs have used as a standard for air sealing. First of all, in this illustration we have a pressure difference from the zone to the house of 45 and from the zone to the outdoors of 5. This indicates, according to the table we looked at a few slides ago, that the roof is 4 times leakier than the ceiling. That's all it indicates. It doesn't say how leaky it is. It just says the roof is 4 times leakier than this is, the roof gable end. Well, some programs have used a standard or a target saying that if this pressure boundary is 45 pascals or greater when the blower door is pressurizing or depressurizing to a level of 50 pascals, no air sealing is needed. So if we have 45 pascals or greater, no air sealing is needed. Well, let's assume that I am a knowledgeable person. I come to this site, but I'm also don't have great integrity. What is going to happen to this value right here if I add attic venting? If I add attic venting to this house, essentially what I'm doing is making this pressure boundary leakier or less resistant to airflow. That means that the 5 pascals will go down. Let's say it goes down to 3, and then the 45 pascals goes up to 47. So again, they equal 50, the blower door pressure difference. So it looks as though I have done some air sealing and made this tighter, but I haven't touched it. All I've done is add attic venting. You can see the folly of this being a program standard. We want this to be 45 or greater. It has nothing to do with the absolute leakage, but only with the relative leakage. So that is not a good way to set a standard. Again, what we're still dealing with here is non-modifiable zone pressure diagnostics. We cannot, in this case, or we are not creating a hole. Creating a hole is harder. We need a calculation aid when we do that, but it's a much more robust analysis. There are cases, however, where non-modifiable zone analysis can be useful. Here's a case of a porch on a house, probably a Victorian house. And the question is this porch here, is the porch ceiling roof cavity connected to the second floor cavity of the house? I'm going to give you a little better view of this. This is using SketchUp, and here I have the same house. I'm going to bring it around so you can see that the porch roof could indeed line up with the floor cavity here. And of course, if it does, and it probably does, then is the porch roof connected with that floor cavity? That would be a bad thing. Now notice also, if we look at the porch ceiling, there is a flat ceiling there, so we have an unclosed cavity there. So we will consider this part right here as being the zone. Let's bring this back around again to about where we were, and then we'll go back to the slide. So how can we find out if this zone, this cavity between the porch roof and the ceiling, is connected to the floor cavity of the house? We can, first of all, set up the blower door, depressurize the house to 50 pascals or pressurize it, and then with our digital manometer we can put a probe up into the zone from the outside, we'll say that's probably easiest. We'd drill a little hole in an inconspicuous spot and stick a probe up. And of course, if there's no connection between this zone, this cavity, and the floor, second floor of the house, then there would be a zero pressure between this cavity and the outdoors. If there is a connection between this zone, this cavity, and the second floor area, then we will notice a pressure that is greater than zero. And that would indicate to us that there is a connection, and we might want to go in and probe around, maybe go through the roof here. I've done that before out in the field. Tear open the roof, take off the shingles, cut into the roof, go in and explore, see what we've got, do air sealing, then put the sheathing back on and put the shingles back on that were taken off. So in this particular case, non-modifiable ZPD can be useful. As a reminder, non-modifiable zone analysis certainly has limitations. Using non-modifiable analysis only as a basis for air sealing work is not a good idea. I mentioned a program that used 45 pascals of pressure as proof that no air sealing work was needed between a house and an attic. Of course, this is not, as I mentioned, as I hope I demonstrated, this is not a good idea.